So what is death? And what is parinibbana? There's a difference. There's a big difference there. Because for some people, it sounds like parinibbana is like it's the real.
Well, you cannot have an objective perspective on both at the same time, because obviously it pertains to your existence. So you're either within death, from which you can't see parinibbana, or if you transcend death as an arahant, then you can see what parinibbana is, so to speak. So it's not, you can't just examine them as these two separate phenomena, because you are either one or the other. Either one pertains to you or the other. So as the Buddha described, death is when the mind is not free from greed, aversion, delusion, and the point of view pretty much continues wandering on and remanifesting. Samsara, yeah.
So death, as commonly thought of, death is simply a wandering on, a change.
A change, yeah.
A major change.
Yeah, a major change.
But not a complete difference.
Well, yeah, but the thing is, like, again, a person who is not free from death, a person who is not free from greed, aversion, delusion, is not free of those things because of the wrong views about the nature of themselves, about the nature of their experience as a whole, about the nature of the world. So from their point of view, even the view of death will be skewed and based upon misconceptions. So that's why, like, I can say, oh yes, death is not the end. Most people with the wrong view, when they hear that, it would sound as if, so it's not the end. But you can't even fathom what not end of death is, unless you're already starting to be free from death, free from greed, aversion, delusion, free from lack of perspective. So it's wandering on, it's death. If you want to find out where death is for you personally in your experience, you have to look where are the things you're scared of most. That's where death is, not where your idea of death is. Because that's what people would often conflate. You have this external notion of death based on what you see and hear, and that's kind of not personal. Like, you need to, or it's easier to not make it personal. So then people will develop notions that, I'm not afraid of death, everybody dies, kind of thing. They're not afraid of their idea of death. If you're truly not afraid of death, which is the mother of all fears, then you wouldn't have any fear towards anything in the world. So is that the case? Are you fear-free in regard to everything and anything? If so, then you can say, I'm not afraid of death. But if, I'm still scared of this, I'm still worried about that, you are nowhere near being free from fear of death. There was that example that I remember I had a number of times. I think they did it in the concentration camps on Jews. They were asking, they were examining like psychological effects of the ones that were about to be killed, and they wanted to see, and they kind of came to a conclusion, if I remember correctly, that they were more afraid, people in the concentration camps were more afraid of being shunned and abandoned by their group there, by their peers, by their community, because basically, that was their identity in these extreme circumstances of a concentration camp. So they were more afraid of that than of a gas chamber. So it's like, people are more afraid to be not accepted by their peers than they're afraid of death. No. They're more afraid to not be accepted by their peers than they're afraid of their idea of death. But the actual death, existentially speaking, is where their death of their personality was, which was, my community, this group that I depend on, they dismiss me. They don't like. I don't exist for them anymore. That was more frightening. So that's where the death is, practically speaking. So that's what I mean. You find where you're afraid. If you follow that thread, that's where death is. That's what death is.
Death of my reputation.
Whatever. For somebody it's reputation, for somebody it's health, for somebody it's status, for somebody it's wealth. Doesn't matter. change of an unpleasant kind that affects you existentially, again, partakes in the nature of death correctly. That's what death is.
Whatever threatens my identity.
Yeah. So again, if somebody is reflecting and they can't seem to be afraid of death, because they're reflecting on the level of their idea of death, not on the level of what actual death is, which you would discover through first finding fear that represents it.
So being shunned from my community or friends or whatever.
I mean that is like for many, like, you know, this kind of experiment was done in these extreme circumstances, but it's not too different out in the world. People are fundamentally want to be accepted, don't want to be rejected. They want to be approved of by the ones that they value, by the ones that they regard dear to them, family, whatever, friends. And you know how much people are afraid of what will people say about me. They might kind of pretend they don't care, but deep down you always feel it. When somebody criticizes you, or somebody speaks badly of you, you're always touched by that, and you cannot stop that. Because you don't know how. So that's already something. So you are afraid of the worldly winds, as the Buddha would say. Fame, disrepute, loss, gain. What are these things? What all these things have in common? It's change. We discussed that before. So you are afraid of the change that affects you adversely, that it's unpleasant. So you're afraid of suffering. You still fear suffering. And death is the ultimate change, the ultimate suffering. Which means if you think you can still have sufferings that you're afraid of, unpleasantness that you don't like, that you want to avoid, that you fear experiencing, and at the same time think, but you're not afraid of death, that's not death.
That's a contradiction.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not afraid of experiencing things I don't want.
Yeah. So that's what I mean. The reason why death is such a proliferated idea out there for people is because it's the most frightening thing. So cover-up systems are pretty much deployed right away. As soon as you start experiencing things not going your way, you start creating a buffer zone between you and the circumstances and the world. And then, like, sometimes, you know, people get shocked by witnessing death, but if you subject them to repetition of that, they will go numb. They will manage to rebuild that idea so they don't feel that applies to them existentially. And that's the common statement, everybody will die, I fully understand that, thus I accept my death. No, you accept the theoretical aspect that you proliferated of death. Because if you were to die next second, will you not be afraid? Or you would. But that idea, the acceptance of the idea on that abstract level, allows you to feel safe, while actually you're not. That's why you actually need to make effort to uncover all the things that you use to clutter the unpleasant truths internally, in order to be able to start practicing mindfulness of death correctly, for example. Because the whole life revolves around avoiding it, covering it up, cultivating only the change you want, not the change you don't want. And then pretending that the change that you don't want, yet you're not in control of, well, ignoring it. That's the best you can do. Ignore the fact that you are liable to death this very moment. Not tomorrow, not in 2 days. And that's already like an abstract thought for an undeveloped mind. So that's what I mean, you need to make this effort and go through this like mental drilling to keep reminding yourself until it takes place, and then you feel it. Then you feel it very much.
I am subject to change, being affected by change.
Yeah, and again, that's why the sense restraint needs to be developed beforehand. Because sense restraint is just a pursuit of change towards pleasure or pleasant change. So you intentionally are accepting change. You want change. Just you want change in one direction, but you don't want when things change in another direction. But for as long as you're cultivating acceptance of change, means when things change in the direction you don't want it to change, you will suffer. You are seeking change through seeking sensuality. You want to change the state of affairs. And because of that, when things change against your wishes, you will also be affected. Because you are not actually mentally understanding that liability to experiencing change as a problem. You don't see change as a problem. You only see certain type of change as a problem, the one that you don't like. But change in itself, you very much welcome, you very much want. And because of that, it will have to happen. The times will have to occur where you will experience change that you don't want. Because change is fundamentally not in your control, and you know that. So if you practice sense restraint just to see that the nature of change is a problem, not necessarily things change for good, things change for bad. Doesn't matter. What matters is that things change. What matters is that change means things are not in your control. That's already the problem. So you don't need to wait for the unfortunate change, for things to change to worse in order to see their nature. On the contrary, usually if you wait for that, it might be too late. So death is the ultimate change. Change to what? You cannot know that, but you know this will change. The disintegration of senses, it's a change. Change of the domain of sight, sound, smell, taste, touch. But it's a core, change in the core. Yet here you are, spend your whole life before that final change of death by cultivating, by relishing, by delighting in change towards pleasure, in change away from pain. So you keep yourself bound to that which is subject to change. Thus, when you change the way you don't want it to, you will suffer. And that's, the Buddha said, in brief, what is suffering? Being united with what you don't want and being separated from what you want. That's it. That's the root. Mm-hmm. That's in the core, that's dukkha. One way or the other.
Being attached or connected to change.
Well, no, what's in common? You want to see what's in common to being united with what you don't want and being separated from what you want. Change is in common. Mm-hmm. Things have changed. So you realize, okay, so can you stop the change? Can you prevent things from changing? Inconceivable. So what can you do then? Oh, I can stop delighting in pleasant change and stop trying to outrun the unpleasant change. So the problem is not in things changing. The problem is in you craving for a particular type of change and craving against another particular type of change. Either way, you're bound by change. You're under the thumb of change. So when it changes, one way or the other, you will be affected by it. But it's just that you ignore that because sometimes you're affected by pleasure. But then equally, you're bound to be affected by pain, by lack of pleasure, which will be painful. So being affected by change is the problem. Not the pleasure that comes out of it or pain that comes out of it. But as long as you only see pleasure, get pleasure, avoid pain, you're not seeing the nature of I'm subject to change.
And the problem with that.
And the problem with that, exactly.
The dukkha.
You don't see the problem of it. And that's where these wrong views, as I said, come into play. Well, everybody will die. But if you're honest, and if you don't actually, if you think about it rationally, you realize, well, everybody will die cannot apply to me dying. Because I can only witness other people's death externally, which will never be how I can experience my own death. So your own death, experience of it, is always internal. Yet here, the notion you're trying to apply to it, everybody will die, thus I'm not worried, is only based on the external perception, which is completely secondary to that which will be affected by death when it comes to you, your sense organs. So if you really want to see how it would be if you were to die, imagine yourself going blind, going deaf, becoming an invalid, losing a sense of smell, touch. That's closer now to what death is. Why? Because now you're contemplating about the loss of sense organs. Not just particular sense objects have changed, which kind of remained, keeps your assumption of sense organs remaining intact, well, keeps that assumption alive. Oh, everybody will die, that's why I'm not worried. Okay, would I be worried if I go blind? If I cannot see things anymore? Would I be worried if I cannot hear things anymore? Oh, that would be extremely unpleasant. Why is that? Because you're so dependent on sense objects. That's what death is. Or rather, death is much closer to that than what you think death is. the fundamental change, they will uproot your sense organs, not just sense objects that come and go, so to speak. Yet the idea that that people keep trying to apply to it is the idea based on just sense object observation. Yeah, he dies, that dies, everything changes, I'll change. Okay, you want to contemplate change? Contemplate cessation of your sense organs while you're still alive. And see how uncomfortable that will be.
Yeah, will that affect you? Yeah.
Of course, yeah. No. But if you're truly not affected, even at clear, comprehending the possibility of going blind, deaf, invalid, crippled, losing your limbs, if your mind remains equanimous in face of it, okay, then you know you're practicing rightly.
So to contemplate death then?
Find that which scares you, that which you don't want to accept, and that's the direction death will come from. So, that change in the most fundamental sense. They will uproot you, not come for you to witness it, which is change of sense objects, not the sense organs. And that's the big difference, whether you're an observer of it or that which has been swept by it. And if you're an observer of it, that's not the death, because you can't observe death, because it sweeps your powers of observation, comes from behind them, so to speak.
So being subject to death means what? Being subject to death.
You mean correctly?
Yeah.
Well, it means being subject to change that's not in your control.
Yeah, but you're subject to that. So when you're not subject to death anymore,
When you're not subject to death anymore, yeah?
like the Arahant is not subject to death.
Yeah. Means the change, means things that are subject to change, the body, the sense organs, he has relinquished. He has no emotional bond with. No wrong views, misconceiving them. No ownership.
Mm-hmm.
All these different aspects of wrong views, he has uprooted. So when those things change, he will remain unaffected, because he's not bound by those things. He has abandoned them.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, he cannot die, so to speak. So
Death, yeah, exactly. So from that point of view, parinibbana is even more than death. We spoke about that before.
Mm-hmm.
So death means basically you will still be taking up things one way or the other, because you haven't uprooted that wrong view in regard to the nature of change, in regard to the nature of ownership. But an Arahant has uprooted all of that. So when his sense organs disintegrate, there is truly the inconceivable end, so to speak. So the Buddha would only, when he would speak about the Arahant, he would say his aggregates break apart. For somebody who is not an Arahant, aggregates don't break apart. That's what samsara is. Bound by aggregates that you are misunderstanding, that you are misconceiving, that you are owning.
assume.
That's what Buddha said, whether you remember the previous life, 500 previous lives, all you remember is these 5 aggregates that you have right now. So that's your framework. For an Arahant, that framework disintegrates because he's not picking it up, because he has uprooted the ownership of it. So in that sense, that's what I mean. Parinibbana is then truly the disintegration.
The death of death, kind of the death of...
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's more than
change.
death. Yeah, no more change after that, so to speak. But again, saying no more change kind of implies designation of what parinibbana is, and that's meaning
Implies
that
a
can
change.
only be true theoretically. Yeah. Practically speaking, as I said, you either partake in death or deathless, parinibbana. So don't have a notion that you think you can think parinibbana, unless in these colloquial terms, while you're not free from death.
Mhm.
And even if you're free from death, then you wouldn't be thinking parinibbana. Your experience is that experience that's going to end in parinibbana when aggregates break apart. So that's why I kind of try to avoid talking about this, because for most people it becomes speculative. They think they can start thinking about parinibbana and death and how it relates to it as if somehow practically relevant for them, but it's not. The only practical relevance there is find that which scares you, find that which upsets you, find that which emotionally disturbs you. Well, and then imagine death being at the other end of that. not at the other end of whatever you observed and assumed death to be. Being shunned by the community. Oh, I cannot live, I cannot sleep at night. People thinking badly of me, people not accepting me, people think I'm an idiot, people think I'm a fool. Oh, there you go. That's what scares you, that's where your death is.
So what then? What do you do then?
Contemplate it, develop strength in regard to it, don't try to outrun it, and certainly don't try to cover it up. You want to, what's the nature of it? You want to, and again, the only way you can see the nature of that which scares you is to stop running away from it or pretending it's not there. So you're scared of being shunned by your community. Why is that? Oh, because it's on the gratuitous pleasure of safety that I was deriving on account of being part of a bigger thing than I am. But were you really a part of a bigger thing? Or were you just assuming yourself, your individual point of view, as belonging to something greater? In other words, can the community make you step outside of yourself and your own responsibility and your own point of view? Inconceivable. So you were literally distorting things for your own emotional gain of safety. And now that became apparent when you looked at that which scared you. And you're already a step closer to being affected by that fear. Now you can endure it. That's what I said, like a wise monk who is practicing would be enduring the unpleasant words of others. In the same sense you endure the elements. So you can't stop that. And you can't stop the discomfort of people criticizing you. Because it feels like an attack on your existence. But you can stop being affected by it. And then, yeah, you have no problem. Oh, it's a bit cold today. Oh, yeah, today I have people criticizing me.
But you see their criticisms clearly.
Well, you won't lose perspective because you're not trying to emotionally cover it up. So you will be able to see if it's a just criticism or unjust criticism. And either way, you wouldn't feel affected by it. Just criticism, okay, like when the Buddha made those rules. People criticize, like, yeah, they have a point. It was like, he wasn't upset about it. He was like, okay, stop doing that. So he would just make a rule for something. But when people don't have their perspective, even when they are criticized irrationally, people have no just basis for criticizing them, but they criticize them out of ill will or whatever foolishness they have, people will be affected and they will try to cater and appease to the people that criticize them, even if they know, oh, this is nonsense, this is simply not true. Because again, they're not acting from that rational recognition, or more importantly, from that ability to endure the discomfort from which you will get perspective upon it. They're acting from that emotional need to remove the pain and have pleasure, even if it's completely irrational, unjust, and baseless criticism. And that's when people fear blame, full stop. Not fear righteous, just blame, and don't fear unjust. No, just fear being blamed. Oh, I better not do it because somebody might mind. But what am I about to do? Is that unwholesome? Is that harmful? No, no, no. So what am I fearing? I'm fearing my rational projected idea of blame affecting me. And that's weakness, which means now you're just cultivating your own weakness.
But seeing that, you start to uncover that.
Exactly.
Weaken
well,
that to weaken.
you start seeing it by being able to endure it. Well, by basically starting to endure it. By saying, no, I will not outrun it. I will not justify myself. I will endure it. You might even review your actions and you get filled with doubt. What if? You endured that as well.
And then the pressure will...
And then that pressure, you get used to it. So it's pressuring you less, and then you get to see more. But the problem is, pressure means look away. You look away, you can't get to see it. So in order to see through that pressure, you have to endure it. And that's exactly what contemplation of death is. The fundamental pressure of this, in its core, my existence will change, will sweep me, will take me away like a flood. So that's what I mean, it's the mother of all fears.
Right. I am subject to change, and it can come in any direction at any point.
So you find things that you find little changes that scare you, that bother you. What if people say this? What if people say, again, change of the environment you want. I want people to approve of me. Look, now you're experiencing change towards people disapproving of you. And that's bothering you a lot.
Yeah, I want these kind of pleasures.
Yeah, fundamentally, exactly. All you want is to avoid pain and experience pleasure. But you will recognize, if you stop blindly trying to outrun it, that this discomfort of that fundamental change of death is unavoidable. Nothing you do in this life on account of sense objects can uproot that, because everything is a result of it. So that's what the Buddha realized when, oh, I'm subject to death, means, yeah, I can live in a palace, protected for the rest of life, I have family, children, gratitude, all of it, yet relationship between me and my own death, that fundamental change, is just fully remains unchanged. As in, I'm still equally liable to it, and nothing I do in the world can come in between and protect me from it. So then he realized that the only way to protect yourself from that fundamental change is to abandon the world, the ownership of it, the ownership of the sense organs.
Delighting in the world.
Which, is assumed, the ownership of the sense organs is assumed through delighting in sense objects. You imply ownership of organs.
So we're talking about anicca, basically.
Well, that's what
Contemplation
change
of
is.
anicca,
Yeah. Change means anicca.
Death,
Yeah.
contemplation of death, contemplation of
Yeah.
anicca.
Anicca doesn't mean end. It means change. If it were to mean end, all you have to do is die and become an arahant, parinibbana. And sure enough, there were wrong views like that back in India when the Buddha was describing them in the suttas. But no, anicca means subject to change. Perpetual change. In this life, next life, in previous life.
Time, subject.
It means you have within, basically, the framework, within the container of things that change against you. Sometimes that against you is felt pleasantly, sometimes that against you is felt unpleasantly. Either way, you are subjected to it. Like being swept in a flood. You know, sometimes you bump into things, it hurts. Sometimes you enjoy the ride on the wave. But either way, you are swept. You have no stable ground, and that's the problem. Not that, oh, I avoid these rocks and I go on these pleasant waves. No, the problem is that you cannot stop it. But yeah, that's what change is. The fundamental non-control that affects you.